Thank you so much. And I am, of course, absolutely delighted to be here. You're absolutely correct. And you know, as you said, I've been around the students and student movement for quite some time. And I'm very familiar with the student survey, and we would have been very involved with the promotion of it and engagement with it when I was in the student movement. I'm a little bit out of it now, but I feel my heart will forever be there. And as you said, the Senator for Students is a big accolade, and it's one that I take very seriously. I don't think, as I said, you kind of always have the student movement in your heart. It's very hard to leave, particularly when you are still somewhat working in the sector as being spokesperson, as you've said. But this, I'm really thrilled to have been asked to launch this report today. I feel like I've gone a full circle now I've completed my student survey circle, if you will. And I'm really pleased to be launching this survey. I think this year, more than any other year, not to diminish any other years, but this year is so important for the survey because of what we've experienced globally, nationally, and you know, the students also obviously experienced the pandemic and had some very negative impacts from it, as we can see in the results of this survey. So you know, the student voice, I think, has never been so important, and this, I think, somewhat due to just the circumstance of COVID, it has been hard for students to get their individual voices heard, and to you know, struggling to try and find their space within the student arena, if you will, just due to the circumstances of how we've had to do things over the past year or 18 months. So I suppose at a time when, you know, we would have had doors traditionally opening to students, you know, for ideas, skills and people and all of these things that will shape the next phase of their lives, you know, students have coming up obviously against literal closed doors. You know, we've had libraries and campuses and support offices, and that's not to say, of course, there's been all sorts of things online, and I want to commend actually the staff and the academic staff and the support staff who really were doing Trojan work throughout the pandemic to try and maintain as much student support as was realistically and virtually, not physically, virtually possible. And when we think about all of the supports that we put in place on our campuses, you know, we have, you know, disability services and counselling and all of these things, you know, and we have invested in those services over the past number of years because we recognise how important they are to have on campus. I think we can see, I'm sure from all of our own engagement with students, the impact of not being directly able to access those services in terms of the anxiety and the stress of a global pandemic, and even just the basic loss of the camaraderie the students get from their classmates and new friends on campuses. And I've heard some really just very sad and lonely stories from students who are now going onto a campus being like, I don't really know anyone. Like, it's, you know, we tried in our classes and stuff. And then there are other students who have thrived and they're like, oh, it's great. We're just chit-chatting online all the time. I can't wait to meet people in person. So it has been a mixed bag for students. I think when we look at the results of the survey, you know, the percentage of students agreeing with each statement of the survey is lower than 2020 in almost every single area. And I think that just drives home, as I've said, the major impact that COVID-19 has had on students during the 2020-2021 academic year. There's also a slightly lower engagement in terms of respondents from students. And I think that, again, is reflective of just students feeling a little bit disengaged from, as I said, the student arena or the academic arena. Also, as the results have shown, and I think it's a no-brainer, you know, the undergraduate experience of first years was really particularly negatively affected by the impact of COVID-19. As we've seen in the survey results, you know, students in first year entered like really significantly statistically lower return scores than previous years. And I'm sure there'll be further discussion on those, you know. And some of the figures that really jumped out to me, for example, was when you look at first year undergraduate students, when they rated their quality of interactions with other students as being excellent or close to excellent, and that was only 47% compared to, you know, around 80% in previous years. And that just, I think, is something we need to think about. And I'm going to put it back onto the institutions themselves in terms of, it's really important that we figure out a way to get that interaction, that social part, it's not just for social, but it's also for learning and development. I think it's really important that institutions think about how we can nourish and grow that over the coming few years of those students' academic careers. Again, engagement with academic staff. So this year, 37% said it was excellent, whereas in previous years it's about 64%. So again, these are students in their first year. I would hope, and I think there will be a bit of work that'll have to be done to ensure that then does not continue as a trend in their second, third, fourth, and perhaps subsequent years. And that's going to be a challenge, I think, for staff and institutions. I won't go through a whole load of other figures. They were just ones that particularly jumped out at me. I know that there were some really interesting things in postgraduate responses in the postgraduate survey, particularly in relation to male and female and percentages. And I know that there's going to have to be further work done on this, but the figures that we have coming back do not seem to be out of sync with what perhaps people maybe would have assumed, or perhaps things that we would have thought were affecting male versus female respondents, and the survey results would show that. I think some of the, on the flip side, then you would see in the postgraduate survey compared to maybe first year responses, 86.3% of respondents had regular contact with their supervisors and felt that was appropriate. But then, so that's a really positive that they were able to engage and continue with that. But then 47% of respondents felt that they had frequent opportunities to discuss their research with other students. So I think we don't ever want to lose that peer-to-peer learning, that opportunity to discuss and engage with research or academic or planning for essays or projects, that peer-to-peer aspect where students can do that either at first year, second year, third year, fourth year, or postgraduate level is so, so important. And I think that's just one of the things that just really stuck out for me when I was reading through the reports and reflecting on my own time in college, both as an undergraduate and a postgraduate, and just how much I would have gotten from being able to engage with my peers and chat with my peers, and those informal opportunities just to shoot the breeze and discuss, what I'm doing, what I'm writing, and get ideas from other people. So I think that's something that the institutions will really have to bear in mind in the coming year, as I said, in the coming years, as to how we can encourage and ensure that students, because they've missed it for a period, don't completely lose the opportunity or the skill set to do that. So I'm not going to go on much longer. I can talk for a very, very long time about students and the undergraduate experience and the postgraduate experience. So I know when to draw a line under these things, but I think it is so very obvious the impact that COVID has had on the student experience, on their academic experience, on the student sphere, and that institutions, I think, really do have a lot of work that they're going to have to do to support students and help shift their way of engaging with the academic sphere and the student sphere into one that it is, about peer learning, about making friends, and then also thriving in an academic setting. So I'm delighted to have been asked to launch this report. As I said, this is a really, really significant piece of research. Nearly 50,000 students have filled out the survey. So students have done their bit. They've shared their experiences through the surveys. And I think what's really important is that institutions now listen to students' voices, opinions, and concerns. But I'm thrilled to launch both of these reports today, and thank you so much for having me.
My experience of group assignments now compared to pre-COVID was quite different. There's a couple of aspects that made this a bit difficult. Number one was internet connection. As we know, not everyone in the country has access to strong internet. And because of that, we ended up spending a lot of time trying to resolve that issue instead of working on our group assignments. Secondly, there was that lack of communication, the face-to-face that you would have got if you were on college campus. At the end of the day, you were at home in a room all by yourself staring at a screen. But despite all those hardships, all students were able to adapt to this problem and make it work.
When I heard 47% of first-year students had good quality experience compared to last year's 80%, it led me to believe that we needed more regular college events that would be carefully monitored and would abide by our country's restrictions. Although they may not get the full experience, at least we can assure our students would interact with their fellow classmates in an enjoyable and safe manner.
I think the biggest factor in explaining such a huge difference between 37% of the students indicating that the interactions with the academic staff were good or excellent, compared to 64% of the students indicating the same thing the years before, was because of COVID-19. I think this was because a lot of lectures were actually happening online rather than face-to-face, which I personally think led to a lot of misunderstanding because we were contacting our lecturers through email rather than face-to-face. And also because a lot of the lectures were actually pre-recorded, so that didn't really give us the opportunity to ask questions, or we felt that our lecturers seemed busy, so we were scared to ask for questions and to take their time. So I found it really helpful that I got to raise my opinion, got to raise my concerns through StudentSurvey.ie.
Thank you so much, first of all, Senator Hoey, for launching the results. I think there was some really key points that you pulled out for us there. I think that point about the fact that so many of our services are on campus and how we have to pivot there is a really key one for us to think about. The point about the loneliness, I think, is so important, and we're very aware of students being in really challenging circumstances for quite some time now, and helping students to overcome perhaps patterns of behaviour and ways of doing things to really achieve the full benefits. I was really struck by the issue of the peer-to-peer learning, and I think that's something that we have to keep really at the front of our mind if we're thinking about any combination of blending and where we actually have the benefits of the face-to-face. And I think that peer-to-peer learning is something we have to really pay attention to. The gender issues, there'll be so much information in the survey that we have to pay attention to, and not just assume that everyone's affected in a gender neutral way, but to really make sure that we make the most of the feedback that we're receiving from our students. You highlighted those points, and we heard from the students themselves, didn't we? And exactly that contrast in some of those scores between 2020 and 21. We do all have a really large responsibility to address these issues, and I would think, not to be pessimistic, but we really need to keep our eye on things for some time to come. I don't think we just flick a switch and all of a sudden all of these issues are solved. So it was great to hear from the students there. So now I'm going to hand over to StudentSurvey.ie Project Manager, Dr. Siobhán Nic Fhlannchadha, and I'll turn off my camera for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I feel that video where Karina talked about internet issues was particularly poignant, as I am having internet issues today. So hopefully it bears with me. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that we can see the presentation, and then I might knock off my camera in the interests of maintaining good internet. Excellent. So before I get into the results for 2021, it is with pleasure that I announce that the StudentSurvey.ie Practitioners Forum will take place again in 2022. Our provisional date is Wednesday, the 2nd of February, and we're aiming for an in-person event. We will have more information for you in due course. And of course, if the guidance for events changes, then we will change our arrangements accordingly. So looking to the results of, first of all, StudentSurvey.ie. A reminder that these results are based on the time, effort and insights of nearly 44,000 students who took part in StudentSurvey.ie 2021, which is a little shy of a third of all first and final year undergrads and taught postgrads in the 25 participating HEIs. However, this also reflects the efforts of a lot of very hardworking staff and student union representatives, particularly noteworthy given the difficult circumstances we were in spring 2021. Some institutions managed to achieve a substantial increase in their response rate during this fieldwork, and others were able to keep theirs high. To summarise the results of StudentSurvey.ie is to do a disservice to the depth of information generated by the students, but I will try. In 2021, the percentage of students agreeing with each question or statement was lower than 2020 for nearly every single question. The two final questions in StudentSurvey.ie encourage students to consider their whole experience of their academic year to date. And for the purposes of this short presentation, I've decided to focus on these, with that caveat that these are only 2 of 67 equally interesting questions. When we evaluate their entire educational experience at their institution, 80.1% of students in 2020 chose good or excellent. This was down 7.8% in 2021 at 72.3% of students. However, equally interesting is the next question, which asks students how likely they would be to attend the same institution they are now attending if they could start over. In 2020, 84% of students indicated that they would probably or definitely go to the same institution they are now attending. In 2021, this percentage went up by 2.1% to 86.1% of students. To my reading, students may not have had the good or excellent experience they were hoping for, but they recognise that much of this is beyond the control of their institution and have a lot of respect for their current institution. If you have a different reading of this, please do use the chat or the Q&A function to share. To take a closer, please do also take a closer look at the full report for a breakdown of the results by question, which relate to each of the indicators included in StudentSurvey.ie, as well as additional questions which do not relate to a specific indicator. Indicators include ones like these, like learning strategies and collaborative learning, which give us insights into the ways students learn, both by themselves and in collaboration with other students. As we heard already in the video, collaborative learning was a challenge for students in 2021, though it was heartening to hear Karina remind us that students and indeed staff got on with a difficult situation and were still able to grow and thrive. You'll have heard Safe in the video talking about the quality of interactions between students, and some related questions appear in the supportive environment indicator, which you may be interested to take a closer look at. Here we can see a varied profile of results, with over 50% of students believing that their institutions emphasised supporting students to succeed academically and using the learning support services quite a bit or very much, while only about a third of students believe that their institution emphasised contact among students from different backgrounds and opportunities to be involved socially quite a bit or very much. These results give us a snapshot in time of the experiences, views and concerns of students during noted level 5 national lockdown in spring 2021. We can only conclude so much from these without context. This could be context in time, like comparing the results with previous years and looking forward to comparing them to the results of 2021. But it must also be local context. The national results can only tell part of the story. But those who are in institutions are best placed to understand students' meaning, and indeed best placed to do something with the information, that fuel that students provide. The public health measures put in place in response to the COVID-19 pandemic meant that first-year undergraduate students who entered higher education in the 2020-2021 academic year are believed to have had a substantially different experience than their predecessors. This chapter sought to create a strong evidence base for that belief and to quantify the impact of COVID-19 on first-year undergraduate students. This chapter focuses on 2 key cohorts, 2021 being the first-year undergraduate respondents in the 2021 StudentSurvey.ie fieldwork, and the baseline, which is the first-year undergraduate respondents from the previous 3 fieldwork years the survey was conducted, so that's 2018, 19 and 20, in order to create a baseline for comparison with the results from 2021. The chapter focused on the factors deemed most affected by the necessitated changes to the traditional on-campus higher education model as seen in statistical analyses. These are collaborative learning, student-faculty interaction, quality of interactions, and supportive environments. The results confirm that the undergraduate experience of first-year students was particularly negatively affected by the impact of COVID-19. First-year undergraduate students who entered higher education in the 2020 to 2021 academic year returned scores that were statistically significantly lower than the baseline first-year undergraduate respondents for nearly all areas of the survey. You will have heard some of these results being discussed by Charlotte, Saif, and Karina in the video, and indeed the full StudentSurvey.ie National Report 2021 and that Looking Deeper chapter contains many more. So I'll move on from those for the moment. However, what I do want to let you know is that if you do have more questions that you want these data to answer, you can do that. For the first time, we have created a StudentSurvey.ie dashboard, which is publicly available and contains national results. This is specifically to support the analysis in the Looking Deeper chapter, and as such, only contains the results for first-year undergraduate students in 2021 compared to 2018, 19, and 20 combined. To access it, and I strongly recommend that you do access it, visit StudentSurvey.ie, click on Results and Reports, and click on the StudentSurvey.ie National Report 2021. This will bring you to a link to the dashboard. Right here. This is what the dashboard looks like. It can be accessed directly from this URL. So however, if you are sharing this kind of dashboard directly with colleagues, please do encourage them to access the full report in order to have all of the information needed to interpret accurately and fully what is displayed in the dashboard. And finally, a huge thanks to Janice Lau in the HEA who created this thing of absolute beauty. Looking to the PGR Student Survey.ie results next, a very healthy response rate of 34% nationally was achieved in 2021. 21 higher education institutions participate in PGR Student Survey.ie, and over 3,500 Masters by Research and PhD students shared their thoughts and experience with us through the survey. I reiterate, to summarise the results of PGR Student Survey.ie is to do a disservice to the depth of information generated by the students, but again, I will try. The percentage of students agreeing with each of the questions or statements compared to 2019 was more varied than the similar comparison that we did for StudentSurvey.ie comparing 2021 with 2020. The percentage of students agreeing with statements about research culture, personal outlook, and some development opportunities in particular were lower. The percentage of students agreeing with statements about supervision and progress and assessment in particular were higher. Again, jumping to the questions which ask PGR students to reflect on their whole experience while being a postgraduate researcher, and bearing in mind that PGR StudentSurvey.ie is on a biennial fieldwork cycle, so the previous results are for 2019. 74.8% of students in 2019 chose good or excellent in that overall evaluation. This figure remained practically identical in 2021 at 74.9% of PGR students. When asked if they were confident that they would complete their research degree program within the institution's expected timeline, again in 2019, 74.2% of PGR students mostly or definitely agreed. However, in 2021, this fell nearly 5% to 69.9%, which suggests the pressure of COVID-19 coming to bear on PGR students in terms of the time they have available to them to undertake their research and delays in completing that research, possibly due to COVID-19. For those of you familiar with the StudentSurvey.ie interim results bulletin, which we published in early June 2021, time was a strong theme among the PGR students with regard to the impact of COVID-19 on their research. Do take a closer look at the other aspects of PGR experience that are reflected in the breakdown of the results by question. They feature varied areas such as research infrastructure and facilities, which asks PGR students about things like their working space and funding, as well as other aspects of their PGR experience, like their research skills acquisition, such as innovation and research integrity, and also other transferable skills, such as communication skills and project management. Finally, I'll draw your attention to the topic of Chapter 4, Looking Deeper, in the PGR StudentSurvey.ie report. The postgraduate research student responses to questions specifically addressing the impact of COVID-19 on their experience point to significant differences between the arts, humanities, and social sciences students and the science, technology, engineering, and math students. in relation to on-campus facilities, funding, a suitable study environment at home, and development opportunities. 63.9% of STEM respondents had adequate access to the on-campus facilities required to engage with their research, while only 50.5% of AHSS respondents had adequate access. This result correlates with the results for research infrastructure facilities, where STEM respondents again indicated that they had better access to resources and facilities to help them carry out their research. And the funding for AHSS and STEM students was examined. 33.8% of AHSS students reported being self-funded, as compared to 7.7% of STEM students. It is speculated that these financial factors may come to bear more heavily on the self-funded AHSS students, causing them to assess their position regarding the continuation of their studies. This speculation is supported by the finding that 17.3% of AHSS students had considered withdrawing from their research programme, as compared to 12.7% of STEM students. As previously mentioned, we also looked at considering whether the suggestions from national and international research that female postgraduate research students have been more affected than male postgraduate research students by the COVID-19 pandemic, and indeed found support for this belief. For instance, 52% of male respondents to PGR Student Survey.ie indicated that they had submitted a paper for publication in an academic journal or book, while the equivalent result for female respondents was 46.7%. Looking to consideration of withdrawal from their programme, 17.5% of female respondents had considered withdrawing due to personal or family reasons, compared to 13.8% of male respondents. The results point to the possibility of a gendered aspect of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, which could disproportionately affect the career progression of female postgraduate research students. This limited preliminary analysis should be interpreted with caution. Future analysis of PGR Student Survey.ie data 2023 will allow for a more confident comparison of pre-COVID-19 data from the surveys in 2018 and 19, data gathered during the COVID-19 from the 21 survey, 2020-21, and post-COVID-19 data anticipated in 2023. In the meantime, research by the HEA, Irish Research Council, and Science Foundation Ireland on the impact of COVID-19 on researchers and academic staff is ongoing, so watch out for the results of that. So to wrap up, thank you very much to everyone here who was involved in any way in the creation of the StudentSurvey.ie and PGR Student Survey.ie National Reports 2021, particularly the two editorial groups and all of the StudentSurvey.ie group members. And a timely congratulations to all attendees from the Technological University of the Shannon and the soon-to-be Technological University of the Southeast. I'm looking forward to StudentSurvey.ie fieldwork in your new institutions in the coming months. Before handing back to our chair, please enjoy the second short video, also created and edited by the excellent Kate Woods in IUA. It features this time some postgraduate research students' reflections on the results from 2021.
It's my personal opinion that not having a suitable working space really impact the ability to work of the postgraduate research students. When in March March 2020, we had to vacate our offices and our labs and start working from home. We lost three very important things. First, we lost that quiet space where we can work and the access to our lab and our research resources. Secondly, and probably even more importantly, we lost access to the community, the research community that we engage every day and exchange ideas, and this also contributes very importantly to research. And finally, and no less important, in a way, we also lost some of our work-life balance because we were forced to work in the same place that we live. So disconnecting from your work was a bit more difficult. So when I read that 68.2% of the postgraduate research students had answered that they considered that they mostly had a suitable working space, I was quite surprised, because this quite contradict my personal experience and that of my peers in the research group where I am based. So I was delighted to be offered the opportunity to participate in a PGR student survey and give my honest opinion about this issue.
I think there's a wide range of opportunities available for postgraduate researchers today, both in academia, industry, policy and beyond. Over the last year of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen how important science and research is in our society, and I think further investment, in particular in academic research, will lead to more opportunities for postgraduate researchers going forward.
I think postgraduate students had opportunity to build personal and professional network with their peers in 3 effective ways. There was a mindfulness session which was carried at least once a month, which helped to improve the mental health of researchers. There were guest lectures from the experts in academia, research and industry, which I found it very useful to build a network. Plus there were each researcher were given opportunity to present their research in oral form or the video form, where every researcher was able to effectively present their research to the general audience.
Thank you so much, Siobhán, for really taking us through those high-level findings from the surveys. I think that's been really valuable for everyone. Thanks for pointing out the dashboard, and I think that's an interesting point about the national figures as opposed to the local, and what people learn at the local level and what changes can be implemented. There's messages coming through in the chat just reflecting the thanks and the appreciation for everyone at StudentSurvey.ie, so please pass on all of those thanks. I think it was great to hear from our postgraduate research students comments that you had also mentioned, Siobhán, around that research community. Now, there's a really important piece for us to think about, because if we're receiving feedback by way of interactions with the supervisor, actually, reporting more positive, that's great. But that issue of the community and how important that whole research community or network or whatever way that's phrased, I think is a really important take home and something that we must not lose sight of. So thank you to our PGR students for sharing their reflections there. I'm going to pass over to Dr. Vivienne Patterson for this next part of our session. Dr. Patterson is Head of Skills, Engagement and Statistics with the Higher Education Authority. Vivienne is a member of the StudentSurvey.ie steering group and is chairperson of the StudentSurvey.ie by Survey Review group, which is conducting the ongoing review of the StudentSurvey.ie survey instrument. So I welcome Dr. Patterson to give a short presentation on the progress so far with the review. And that once we've had Dr. Patterson's presentation, there'll be a question and answer session. So again, please use the question and answer function to post your questions. So over to Dr. Patterson, please.
Thank you, Maggie, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Just bear with me. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, can I just get rid of that a second, because I think I have to do something else. Okay. Bear with me. If anybody wants to submit a Springboard course in in PowerPoint this year, I think I'll do it by the looks of things. But anyway, listen, thanks everybody for being here this morning. And as Maggie said, I've been chairing the Student Survey Review Group, which was set up in March of this year. We have 13 members in the group, including myself. And in that group, we have academic and admin staff from higher education institutions who are very familiar with the Student Survey, StudentSurvey.ie and the postgraduate survey. We have representatives from QQI, we have representatives from the National Engagement Programme. We have Alex McCormack, who came to us from the NSSE project, who develops the NSSE project in the US, on which a lot of the student survey is based. And we also have representatives from USI and also a number of student representatives. So we started. Next slide. How do you do next slide? Okay, yeah. So when we looked at this, we proposed a number of areas that we would look at. So firstly, we decided that we would just take a quick look at the student survey objectives that were set up initially to see if they were still relevant and still reflected the work of the project. Secondly, we were going to take a look at questions that contributed to an indicator, but with the view really amongst the group that these questions would remain largely unchanged. And thirdly, we were going to look at and review the non-indicator items with a view to maybe retaining, removing, revising or combining some of these. Because I suppose one of the areas of concern always with the student survey is that it's very long. And this was an opportunity maybe to take a look at some questions that may be now obsolete or may be reflected elsewhere in the survey. The fourth thing that we wanted to look at was to have a look at some topical modules that we felt we may be able to offer higher education institutions the option of using at various stages in the survey. And where we started with that was to look at the NSSE topical modules. And we'll talk about that now in a few minutes. And finally, what we wanted to look at were including some questions, not engagement questions, but questions more about the types of cohorts of students that were answering the questions. And I suppose this was really to reflect on how we could use the survey a bit more in terms of policy development. So when we looked at the objectives, we did decide to revise very slightly some of the objectives that were initially set up for the programme. We made very slight changes, and I suppose most of the changes were made just to reflect more the engagement purpose of the survey rather than satisfaction, which we kind of had in there from the start, but also to reflect, I suppose, how the higher education institutions have been using the student survey data for their enhancement of their teaching and learning, and to try and identify issues that may have to be addressed within an institution. So we slightly changed them, nothing major, just slight reflections of how the project has evolved over the last number of years. So when we looked at the questions that contributed to an indicator, we decided that we weren't going to change any of these questions, that we were going to leave them unchanged. However, when the field testing was carried out, a number of students, particularly part-time, flexible online and art and design students, gave feedback around some of the questions that they thought were maybe not very relevant to them. So we decided that we'd leave the questions largely unchanged, but that we'd review these questions just to try and make the wording of them a little bit more inclusive for different discipline areas and different cohorts of students. But in the main, these questions have remained unchanged, and the actual context of the question hasn't changed, the meaning of the question, and any slight wording change won't change that meaning of the question. In relation to the non-indicator items, of which there are 22, we decided that we retain 7 of these questions, mainly because the group felt that these questions provided highly useful information for the higher education institutions, and that the answers to these questions were used a lot by the higher education institutions, and so they were retained. We decided to remove 3 questions around memorizing course material, work with academic staff on a research project, spending significant amount of time on studying and academic work. And they were mainly removed on the basis that we didn't feel that they were used or that they were very useful, or in some cases that they may have been reflected in the other questions that made up parts of the indicators. We revised 2 questions around exercise and physical activities and community service and volunteer work. And that was just to clarify, and we haven't fully revised them yet. We're still in the process, but some of the feedback was that these questions, they were unsure about whether the physical fitness was to be in general or was it while you were in college, and the same with the community service or volunteer work. So we're looking at those questions. And then we took 7 questions in the non-indicator items, and we've combined them into a new indicator called learning, creative and social skills. So we felt that they were important that we retain them, but we felt that they were similar in a way that we could combine them into a new indicator like we have for the other indicators. And then we had 3 final questions where we are just deciding about whether we combine them into 1 question or we retain 1 or 2 of the 3 questions. So I suppose I started by saying that maybe it was an opportunity to reduce the number of questions in the survey, but I don't think we're actually going to end up reducing them in any significant manner. Which I suppose shows the importance of a lot of the questions that were there in the non-indicator questions. So then we looked at the NSSE topical modules, and many of you will know that the core student survey questions are based on the core NSSE survey. They had developed a number of topical modules that are short sets of questions on designated topics. And these we were going to just take a look at. So we looked at them and we picked a number of areas that we wanted to look at. We carried out field testing just to test the appropriateness of the questions in an Irish context and to identify our most useful or relevant questions from the larger set of available questions. The administration of these questions remains to be finalised. It is anticipated, however, that the 5 topical modules that we've selected will be formed and offered to all participating institutions. We also anticipate that there will be no more than 1 topical module to be added to a survey for each HEI in any given year, so as to not unduly increase the burden on students completing the survey. And one option being considered is that each institution can choose 1 topical module to add to their survey in a given year, and that they could add the same one for several years to build up data over time. Or alternatively, they could use 1 topical module and select that annually and add it to the survey add to the survey for all participating institutions and students for that year. We thought it was timely that we looked at maybe adding these topical modules, because there are so many issues now that weren't around, when Student Survey first started in 2013 that are impacting on students, or that we felt that it would be good to gather information in these areas. So the topical modules that we field tested were around career and workforce preparation, around civic engagement, experiences with online learning, inclusiveness and engagement with cultural diversity, and experience with information literacy. So when we go out with these topical modules, we will have instructions at that stage coming back from our group about how they can be used and what the questions are in each of the modules. Finally, then we looked at including some questions to identify different cohorts in the national results. So what we wanted to do was to see if we could identify members of one of the target groups targeted in the National Access Plan. For example, entrants from socioeconomic groups that have low participation in higher education, students with disabilities, lone teen parents, and ethnic minorities. Although we do have gender currently, we wanted to expand this gender field and include a self-declared gender question. And we also wanted to include a question around sexual orientation. So we have field tested these questions. There are a number of additional questions that will be included. These questions will be optional for people to answer. They won't be compulsory. But I think it's really useful that we maybe are able to identify how some of these cohorts, you know, are their answers slightly different to other cohorts? Are there particular issues that could be addressed by our higher education institutions for some of these groups? So we'll see how that progresses as the survey goes on. If you have any feedback on any of the updates on the review of the survey, if you could send that to Siobhán at StudentSurvey.ie, and our consultation period will run until Friday, the 12th of November. If you have any questions or comments, I think we're going to take them now for myself or Siobhán or any of the other panel members. And thank you very much for tuning in today.
Thank you so much for that, Vivienne. I can see there's a huge amount of work in that ongoing reflection and modifications. And I think that that's really important. That's exactly how it should be, isn't it? But that's not to trivialize the amount of work that's involved. Just to comment on those last comments that you made about self-declared gender and sexual orientation, and obviously people being free to choose. I think if we're serious about EDI and really making sure that our higher education institutes really reflect the full diversity of humanity, then it's really important that we look for any challenges that may be faced by particular groups of our populations and make sure that we can address those. So it was just a personal reflection. I think that's really welcome. So thank you to the review group on that. You're absolutely right. We're open now for questions. There's a few questions that have come in through the Q&A, and there's also perhaps some comments or partial questions in the chat that I think if we have time it would be good to pick up. So there's a couple of questions in from Alistair McCall, and the first one is about asking the findings of Student Survey 2021 to the extent to which it challenges, you know, the view that blended learning was a great success, and I think that's the question as it's phrased, and I wonder, Vivienne, if you want to come back on that one. Or Siobhán, but
I suppose, yes, a blended learning has been a great success, and the amount of work that has been done in the higher education institutions in the last 18 months has been phenomenal, and it has brought, I think, that whole area of teaching and learning forward so much that, you know, nobody could have ever anticipated how quickly the institutions could have made a change. But I think, you know, although online learning is convenient and it has worked well, I think definitely that blended learning approach is the welcome approach rather than a fully online. So I think, you know, the students have been reflecting that. I don't know, Siobhán, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's fine. I'm just reading with interest the questions that are coming in relation to the review. So I'll hand back over to yourself, Maggie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think Alistair is asking the question in terms of, you know, challenging that idea that we're saying that blending's been a great success. I think we, you know, the survey wasn't actually looking at blended, was it? We were very much locked away. So I think we all acknowledge all of those challenges that students and staff face, and that's exactly the points that we're reflecting on earlier. There's a specific question about when the results for the individual, the participating institution will be published. So Siobhán, perhaps you could take that one.
We've answered that one. That will be in January, which is in keeping with our usual kind of cycle for that. So we release the reports usually around this time of year, and then the high level results for each of the institutions will be available on the website in early January.
Okay, that's great. And the other one is also a sort of pragmatic, practical one about a document outlining those proposed changes that we just went through. So thinking about it as a document that could just be circulated. Here are the changes. Yes, that's a thumbs up. So that's good. That's all convenient there. I'm just looking at the other questions.
There's one there from Lewis around the SRS. Yeah, I can take that one, Lewis. Yes, we did everything we could to try and see if we could facilitate that, but there are data protection issues around that type of information in the student record system, so it isn't possible, unfortunately. It would be easier if it was.
Okay, thank you, Vivienne.
Siobhán, did you want to?
Yeah, if I may add to that as well, just I suppose there had been a consideration of how we would go about looking for this information. And I think part of the reason that we went for it from this tack was to give students the opportunity, as Vivienne said, to kind of opt in to answer these questions if they wanted to or not, so that if a student wanted to self-declare, that they could do so, and do so in the comfort of knowing that these are going to be entirely anonymous. So for the first year in 2022, we will pilot this. So we're not going to be releasing these data back to the individual institutions with the results for their individual students. It will only be at a national level. So it will remove any possibility whatsoever of an individual student being identifiable from those results. So emphasis on that being a pilot. We'll take the results from 2022 and consider them further. But that I think there was a bit of a democratic aspect to it as well, allowing students to provide this information if they wanted to.
Yeah. So that's the comment about any potential downstream implications in terms of identifying a group. I think everyone is really aware of all of those sensitivities, and it's important to point it out. But I think without knowing the challenges that particular groups may face, then it's a real challenge to address them. We can find ourselves in situations where we assume things may be one way, and it's really important that we don't fall into such assumptions, because they're not always correct. There's a comment from Robin Flynn in the chat about the gender divide on PGR and concerns there, and I just wondered if Vivienne or Siobhán would want to reflect on that, and perhaps ways in which we can tease that out and think about what are the real issues that are at play, that would then help institutions address what the specific gender challenges may be in PGR.
Siobhán, I'll leave that one to you, maybe.
A nice easy one there, Siobhán.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find that comment so that I can just kind of...
It came from Robin Flynn. It's just a comment on a question.
Seeing it.
I didn't make it up. It definitely came in as a...
Maggie, would you mind just running that one by me again? Because I can. The gender divide among PGR students is worrying due to the potential to amplify the problems we know exist at faculty level. I suppose one of the reasons that we drew attention to that in particular, and that's been one of the elements that has been picked up in the national media today in reporting on these results, is that what has always struck me in analysing the results for PGR Student Survey.ie in previous years is that if you look back at the National Report of 2019, gender differences are practically absent. So I think that's a very positive thing, about while we know from other research that gender differences do emerge later on in the careers of researchers, it doesn't appear to emerge at the point of being in their early career of being graduate researchers. So for me, it struck me that it raises an eyebrow, I suppose, as to whether these differences are starting to emerge at this very, very early point in the career of researchers. So I would hasten to add, though, that this is only 1 year of data in an exceptional year. So that's why I would just, I suppose, reiterate that point about needing to look at this in a brief. But it would be a concern if those differences were starting to emerge so early in the career of researchers, whereas that doesn't seem to have been the case in previous years.
Okay. Thank you, Siobhán. I'm really mindful of time, so just a couple of quick comments before we close out, if that's okay. There are a couple of questions there, if I could bundle just, and we can address them quickly if you can, and then perhaps follow up later. So there's the question about the underrepresented groups that we mentioned earlier, and the question is a pragmatic one in terms of, can that not be picked up when it comes back to the HEA? I think there would be reasons perhaps why that wouldn't work, but anyway, that question's there. And then the questions about sort of full on-campus promotions, you know, all the physical posters and everything like that, the promotional materials, is that shift going to take place, or are we thinking about really focusing back on the online?
I'll give a brief comment there. As a little bit of both. So we will be providing some promotional materials to institutions such as posters to make the survey visible on campus, but we had quite a lot of success in 2021 fieldwork with our incentive prizes. So if you remember, they were online vouchers that could be used online, AirPods and Fitbits, and they proved to be very popular with students. So we are going to continue with the use of those rather than what we would have done previously, which was produce an awful lot of particularly plastic materials that might have been a single use for students or that they might have had lots of. So we're trying to avoid creating those sorts of materials and instead focus on items that are of value and that really incentivize the survey for students. That is, however, within the gift of the institutions how they want to do that. So I'll provide these materials and institutions can decide yourselves as to what you think is appropriate to, and how you think it is appropriate to encourage your students to take the survey by bribing them, and it's up to you whether you want to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Siobhán, for that. I am mindful of time, so if I could just say thank you to everyone for attending and for participation. You know, there's lots of comments in the chat, and hopefully we did manage to cover the questions, answer your questions in time. I'd like to thank Senator Hoey for launching the report, and obviously Siobhán for the overview of the results, and Dr. Patterson for presenting the progress with the survey review. So a huge amount of work here, all very much appreciated. As we said at the outset, the feedback from our students is all important. So thank you to our students who completed the surveys, and to those who shared their reflections on the results. I thought the videos were really great for bringing all of that alive. And finally, thanks to staff and student union representatives in the participating institutions who ensure that the fieldwork happens and the results are analysed and acted upon annually. Lots of work there, but really important work. So we look forward to seeing you all at the next StudentSurvey.ie Practitioners Forum on the 2nd of February 2022. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.